There's a photograph on my phone that I haven't deleted. I've tried. 3 times. My thumb gets there, hovers, and I put the phone face down on the table and go make tea I don't want. It's just a man standing in front of a gate. That's all. If you showed it to someone who wasn't there, they'd scroll past it. Guard at Buckingham Palace. Nice shot, yeah. But if you'd been standing where I was standing, about 11 feet to his left, eating a disappointing sandwich from a paper bag, you'd understand why I can't delete it. Because what that photograph caught, completely by accident, was the exact moment a person disappeared inside a roll. And nobody noticed, or maybe everybody noticed, and that was the whole problem. It was October. That particular brand of London October that can't decide if it wants to be autumn or punishment. The sky the color of old dishwater, the wind doing that thing where it finds the gap between your collar and your neck with surgical precision. I've been in the city 4 days on what my sister kept calling a solo healing trip, and what I kept calling, I had annual leave left and nowhere else to go. Buckingham Palace was not on my list. I'm not a monarchy person. I have opinions, but I walked further than I meant to after the museum closed early. My feet had made a unilateral decision, and suddenly there I was, the gates, the gilded tips, the tourists pressed against the iron like it was a relic, and their phones were collection plates. The crowd that afternoon was the usual international assembly. A school group from somewhere in Italy, the kids in matching orange lanyards, their chaperone texting with the defeated energy of a man who has accepted his fate. A couple from what I guessed was South Korea, matching backpacks, methodical about their angles. They'd step, frame, shoot, like a quiet machine made of 2 people. An American family, loud in the friendly way that makes some people flinch and some people smile. The kind of loud that's actually just enthusiasm with no volume dial. And the guard. There's always the guard. He was posted at the sentry box to the right of the central gate, the one closest to the road. Tall. That's the first thing. Not tall in an exaggerated way, but tall in a structural way, like whoever assembled him was precise about the specifications. The bearskin hat added absurdity to architecture. Beneath it his face was, I don't know how to say this except to say it's sealed. Not blank. There's a difference. Blank is absence. His face was presence under lock. Everything in there, nothing getting out. Black tunic, red trim, white gloves, the whole ceremonial grammar of it. He'd been still for as long as I'd been watching, which was maybe 4 minutes, which felt like longer. I ate my sandwich, ham, and something, mostly bread. The Italian kids found him first, the way kids always find the thing the adults are pretending to be sophisticated about. One boy, maybe 9, nose already red from the wind, detached from the group, wandered close, and just stared. The undisguised, full-face stare that children do before they learn to pretend they're not staring. The guard did not blink. The boy leaned slightly forward, studying him the way you study a painting when you're trying to figure out if it's real. Then he turned around and reported something to his friends in rapid Italian. 2 more kids drifted over. The chaperone looked up from his phone, assessed the situation as non-lethal, and went back to texting. One girl held her hand about 6 inches from the guard's arm. Not touching, just near. Testing, the way you test a flame. The guard's eyes moved. Just tracked forward. Not to her. Past her. Through her. Like she was weather. The girl yanked her hand back and dissolved into giggles and ran back to the group, and that was their interaction. 30 seconds of theater. They'd have something to tell their parents. The guard returned to wherever he'd been. I finished the sandwich. Started on the crisps. The American family arrived at maximum volume, and I mean that affectionately because their volume had texture. Wasn't noise, it was information. Mom, Dad, 2 teenage daughters, and a boy who looked about 12 and had the manic energy of someone who'd had too much Ribena on the tube. The dad had a camera, an actual camera, not a phone, which earned my quiet respect. One of the daughters was filming herself for what I assumed was some social media platform, walking and talking to the lens in that fluid, practiced way that people her age have and people my age watch with a mixture of admiration and existential dread. He literally hasn't moved, she said to the camera. Like, literally hasn't moved. Look at him. Dad, does he even breathe? The dad laughed. The mom said, sweetie, don't, but she was already moving toward him, filming, narrating. I'm going to see if I can make him laugh. For the algorithm. Absolutely not. Her mom said, which is the sentence that in the specific energy field of a teenage girl with a phone translates to watch me. I'll give her this. She didn't touch him. She stood beside him at the correct tourist distance and pulled a face, a genuinely committed, full-feature theatrical face, eyebrows at her hairline, cheeks puffed. The kind of face that, performed at a dinner table, would make her little brother spit out his drink. The guard did not spit out his drink. The guard did not have a drink. The guard had a rifle and a face that was a locked room. She tried 3 more faces, each one escalating. Nothing. She turned back to the camera and gave an exaggerated shrug and said, undefeated, which was either about him or about herself, and walked back to her family. I noticed, watching this, that at no point did anyone ask his name. At no point did anyone speak to him as though he were a participant in the interaction rather than a prop inside it. The children tested his stillness. The girl tested his humor. The dad photographed him the way you photograph a landmark. Nobody said, hello, are you warm enough in that coat? That wind is brutal. He was right there. He was nowhere. His name, I found out later, was, well, I don't know his name. I never learned it. What I'm about to tell you happened, and I watched it, and I don't know his name, and somehow that's the thing that keeps sitting at the back of my throat when I think about this. What I know is this. Sometime after the Italian group moved on, and while the American family was still debating whether to go in search of hot drinks, a man across the road collapsed. Not dramatically. Not the movie kind of collapse where somebody catches them. The kind where one moment a person is upright, and the next moment they simply aren't. He was maybe 60, heavy coat, carrying a plastic bag from a supermarket. 1 second, man. Next second, the pavement. The crowd reaction was that particular urban pause. 3 seconds of collective recalibration where everyone is checking whether what they saw was what they saw. Then a woman crouched beside him. Then someone said loudly, is anyone? And the guard moved. Not bolt. Not sprint. He moved the way a building moves in an earthquake. Everything at once, with purpose that has been sitting in storage waiting for exactly this release. He was across the road before most people had processed the situation. The rifle was already handed. To who? I couldn't tell. Another guard appeared from somewhere, the mechanics of it invisible, and he was crouched beside the man on the pavement with his white gloves on the man's shoulders, speaking. Not shouting. Speaking. His voice, from where I was standing, was low and even. I couldn't hear the words. I could hear the register, the tone you use when you need someone to stay present, the tone that costs something to produce because you have to be steady first yourself. The supermarket bag had fallen. Tins rolled. A woman stopped one with her foot. The girl with the phone was filming again. I watched her face over the top of her phone, and her face had changed. No algorithm in it now. Just a girl watching something she hadn't expected to watch. The man on the pavement made a sound. Not words. Just a sound that meant I'm still here. The guard said something back. Someone in the crowd had already called for an ambulance. I heard them on the phone, brisk, efficient, giving the street. 2 tourists had created a loose semicircle without being asked to, just the instinctive human geometry of protecting someone vulnerable. A woman offered a scarf. Someone else gave up their folded newspaper as a makeshift cushion. It took 9 minutes for the ambulance. I know because I watched the whole thing, and afterwards, I looked at the timestamps on the photos I'd mindlessly taken on my phone without really deciding to. For 9 minutes, the guard stayed where he was. Crouched, speaking in that even register. At one point, he took off one of the white gloves, just one. I remember noticing that the small, specific wrongness of it, the single unloved hand, and held the man's wrist. Checking pulse. Just checking. The man's color came back incrementally. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was sitting up, apologizing, the way people who frighten strangers always apologize, the embarrassment layering over the scare. The guard stood. Retrieve his glove from his pocket. Put it on. A paramedic said something to him. He nodded once. He walked back across the road. And that's what happened. Someone in the crowd started clapping. I don't know who started it. I didn't see the first pair of hands. I just heard it. One person, then 2, then the particular multiplication of it, where sound takes on its own momentum and people join not because they've decided to, but because the sound is already happening and joining feels like the right response to the sound. It spread around the gate area. Maybe 30, 40 people. Some of them had seen the whole thing. Some of them had just arrived and didn't know what had happened and were clapping because everyone else was clapping, which is its own honest human response. The Italian kids clapped. The American dad clapped with the camera still around his neck, which gave him a slightly awkward angle, and he was grinning. The girl with the phone had lowered it, finally, and she was clapping too. It lasted maybe 15 seconds. Enthusiastic. Genuine. The kind of clapping that means we saw you, we saw what you did, and it was good. And I watched his face. Here's the thing about watching someone's face when they don't know you're watching it, when they're not performing for you, when they have no reason to manage their expression because there is no relationship between you, you see things. His jaw tightened. Not anger. The opposite of anger. The thing that sits underneath the thing that might become something if he let it. His eyes went somewhere, not to the crowd clapping at him. They went to the middle distance, which is what eyes do when the inside of your skull is louder than the outside world. He took one breath that was different from the other breaths. Slightly longer. The kind that's actually the body asking, are you okay? And the brain answering yes, get back to it. And then the ceremonial face returned. Locked. Present. Sealed. He walked back to the sentry box. Took his position. Returned to stillness. The clapping drifted off the way applause does, not ending so much as dissolving, individual hands finding their pockets or their phones, the moment filing itself away under nice thing I saw today. And I stood there with my crisp packet in my hand and a feeling I couldn't name yet, watching him be still, watching the crowd drift back to its tourist rhythms, the orange lanyards reforming, the Korean couple resuming their methodical stepping and framing, and I thought they all saw a guard. Nobody saw a person. Let me try to explain what I mean. When you clap at a performance, you are participating in a contract. The performer knows the terms. They stood up and performed. You sit and receive. At the end, hands. It is mutual. It is understood. The performer bows, which is the body's way of accepting the transaction. He didn't bow. He couldn't bow. His role has no mechanism for bowing. The applause hit him and ran off the way water runs off certain surfaces because there was nowhere for it to go. He is not, in his function at that gate, a person who receives. He is a person who holds. He performs permanence. The entire grammar of his role is I do not acknowledge you. And within that grammar, 30 people trying to acknowledge him is not seen. It's a breach. Not a cruel breach. A loving breach, which is sometimes harder. Because what the clapping said, however warmly it meant to say it, was, we are watching you perform. And what he had just done for 9 minutes on that pavement was the one moment, maybe in an entire shift, maybe in an entire week, where he was not performing, where he was just a person who knew how to check a pulse and had a steady voice and got down on the ground next to someone who was frightened. And they applauded it like it was part of the show. I am aware this is a lot to read into a man's face. I'm aware I could be wrong. I'm also aware that I stood there another 20 minutes after everyone else had moved on, eating nothing, and I keep a photo I've tried to delete 3 times, so make of that what you will. What I kept thinking about was the asymmetry of it. The way the crowd had spent an hour treating him like scenery, testing his stillness, photographing him as backdrop, performing at him as content, and then the moment he acted like a human being, they rewarded him with exactly the same gaze. Turned up to clapping volume. We see you. But what they saw was still the costume. Still the gate. Still the story they'd already written before they arrived. Royal Guard does remarkable thing. British discipline. Cérémonial tradition. Pride of nation. They didn't see that he'd looked at the man on the ground the way you look at someone you understand might be your father, your neighbor, a man who bought tins of something at a supermarket on a Tuesday and didn't expect his day to go this way. They didn't see that the one unloved hand was not procedure, but instinct. You don't check a pulse through white cotton if what you actually want is to feel whether someone is still here. They saw a guard being impressive. They missed a person being human. And maybe he knew that. Maybe that's what the jaw did. Maybe that's what the eyes going somewhere else was. Or maybe I'm a person with leftover annual leave and a disappointing sandwich who stood in the cold too long and started projecting. Both can be true. The girl with the phone. Before she left with her family, the dad herding them toward what I heard him say was somewhere with soup for the love of... She stopped. Looked back at him. She didn't lift the phone. She just looked. He was completely still again by this point, back in the full ceremonial posture, the locked face, the forward gaze. To anyone arriving fresh, nothing had happened. A guard at a gate. A very cold afternoon. She looked at him for maybe 5 seconds. Then, she put her phone in her jacket pocket. Her family was already 20 feet ahead. She turned and jogged to catch up, and I heard her say to her sister, he just went right back to standing there. Like nothing. And her sister said, wild, the way teenagers say wild when they mean something they don't have bigger words for yet. I thought, yes. Like nothing. Or, like everything contained. Same thing if you're not careful about which side of the gate you're standing on that I went, and got soup. A small place 2 streets over, steamed windows. A radio playing something that might have been jazz or might have been a very confident accident. I sat at a table by the window and ate minestrone that tasted like someone had made it with genuine intention and thought about what I'd watched and whether I had any right to feel as unsettled as I did. I didn't know this man. I'd watched him for maybe an hour and a half total across the afternoon. He hadn't looked at me once. Or, if he had, he'd looked through me the way he looked through the Italian girl's testing hand. I was tourist-shaped to him, arrived, photographed, left. Background, which is, of course, the other side of it. I started trying to remember the other people I'd made into scenery. The man who drives the same bus I take on Tuesday mornings, I don't know his name. I know his face the way you know furniture. Necessary, present, not examined. I say thank you when I get off, which I've told myself counts as acknowledgement, and which I'm now less sure about. The woman at the dry cleaners near my flat who always asks how I am, and I always say fine thanks with a conclusive energy that means I am answering the ritual, not the question. I don't know her name either. She's been asking me how I am for 3 years. The security guard at the office building I worked in for a year before I left, he had a red thermos, and he read actual paperback books at the desk, and I said good morning to him every day for 12 months, and I genuinely could not tell you the color of his eyes, or whether he had a family, or what the books were. I'm not confessing this to be self-flagellating. I'm confessing it because the guard at the gate was an extreme version of something that is, I think, very ordinary. We have a remarkable capacity to be surrounded by people and be alone inside it, to look directly at someone and see a function rather than a face. The ceremonial uniform just makes it official. It takes the invisible thing and puts a costume on it. There's a word in Japanese, mono no aware, which translates roughly as the pathos of things, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence, the ache of things passing. I read about it once and wrote it down in a notebook I've since lost, and now I only remember the concept, not my original handwriting of it. What I was feeling, sitting with my soup, wasn't quite that. It was adjacent. It was the specific ache of a person being seen and not seen at the same time. Because they had seen him. 30 people had turned their hands into applause for him. That is not nothing. That is the opposite of nothing in terms of what humans do with their bodies when they want to signal you matter. It just landed wrong. Like a letter delivered to the right address, but the wrong name on the envelope. Something in the transaction went sideways. I keep coming back to the jaw. The tightening. When you spend a long time being invisible and someone suddenly produces a spotlight, and the spotlight turns out to be aimed at your uniform, your function, your performance of the role rather than you inside it. That has its own particular quality of loneliness. Maybe the loneliest kind. Because it's well-meaning. You can't be angry at well-meaning. You can't say that applause hurt. Nobody would understand what you meant. You'd sound ungrateful. So you put your glove back on. You take your position. You return to stillness. My sister called while I was on my second cup of tea. She asked how the trip was going. I said I watched a Royal Guard help a man who collapsed, and then a crowd applauded him, and I think I've been thinking about it for 3 hours. She said, "Are you okay?" Yes. I just can't figure out why it made me sad. She's 4 years older than me and wiser in the specifically annoying way of people who've had therapy and done the work. She was quiet for a second, not empty quiet, the thinking kind. And then she said, sometimes being clapped for is the thing that shows you how alone you were the whole time. I sat with that. That's either very insightful or very bleak, I said. Tuesday, she said, which is her shorthand for probably both. There is something about the uniform that I've been circling and haven't said directly yet. The uniform is a contract with disappearance. When you put on, you are agreeing, formally, institutionally, historically, to not be a person in public, not to not have personhood. That's different. You are agreeing that your personhood will not be visible. It is a choice, and there's honor in it. And there's also, I think, standing outside it, never having been inside it, a cost that doesn't get talked about at the recruitment stage. What does it do to you over years to practice invisibility at the level of a discipline? What does it do to the muscles of the face to learn that particular stillness? What does it do to something interior when the version of you that's allowed to exist in public is a curated absence? I don't know. I can't know. I haven't worn it. But I watched what happened when he stepped out of the uniform for 9 minutes, crossed the road, got on the ground, used his hands for something other than ceremony. And I watched what happened when the crowd met those 9 minutes with applause, and I watched him put the glove back on. And I think what that jaw did in that second was hold something that had nowhere to go. Before I left the soup place, I asked the woman behind the counter, mid-50s, purple cardigan, nail polish chipped on one hand, if she'd been on her feet all day. She looked at me for a moment like I'd said something in an unexpected language. Since 7:30, she said. You make it soup, I said. I mean that. The stock tastes like someone was paying attention. She looked at me again. Something crossed her face that I can only describe as a quiet recalibration. Thank you, she said. Not the reflex version, the real one. I paid and left, and I don't know what that proves or doesn't prove. Maybe nothing. Maybe I was just a person who'd been thinking too hard for 3 hours and overcorrected toward sincerity. But the soup was good, and she had been paying attention, and it cost nothing, genuinely, completely nothing, to say so in a way that means it. On the way back to my hotel, I stopped, just for a minute, at a different gate, a different section of the long fence that runs around the palace. No sentry box here. Just the iron and the gold tips and the dark trees behind. The tourists had mostly cleared out. The light was doing that early evening thing where London stops looking like a city and starts looking like a painting of a city all amber and gray, the buildings going soft at the edges. I stood there, thought about the photograph I'd taken, the one I keep trying to delete. In it, if you look past the gate and the uniform and the bearskin hat, which is a lot of visual noise, I'll grant you, there's a face. Sealed, yes. Locked, yes. But if you look at the eyes, and I've looked at them more times than I care to admit, there's something there. Not sadness. Not what you'd project onto it if you were looking for sadness. Something older and more specific. The look of someone who has decided, a long time ago, that endurance is not the same as surrender. That deciding to stay still while the world moves around you is a choice, not a defeat. That the cost of a discipline is real, and the discipline is still worth it. Maybe. Or maybe I'm reading too much into JPEG data at 12 megapixels. Both, probably. It's usually both. I never went back to the gate. The next 2 days I walked through markets and sat in galleries and ate things I can't afford at home and FaceTimed my sister and got rain on in Shoreditch and found a record shop that smelled like someone had designed a nostalgia machine. The usual texture of 4 days alone in a city you don't belong to, which is its own specific and underrated pleasure. But I thought about him. Not obsessively. Not the way you think about something unresolved. More the way you think about something that landed in you and settled rather than dissolved. The thought just lived there. Still lives there if I'm honest. A man crossing a road. White glove removed. One unloved hand on a stranger's wrist. 30 pairs of hands coming together. One jaw tightening. I've been trying, since I got home, to find out if there's a formal process for acknowledging things like that. A way to send something to the regiment, The barracks, whoever administers the protocol of a person who crosses a road on a Tuesday in October and sits on the pavement with someone who needed someone to sit with them. I haven't found a clean answer. There are forms for things, apparently. There are channels. I haven't filled out a form. I keep thinking the form isn't the point. The form would be the wrong version of the applause. Another set of hands aimed at the uniform. What I would want to say, if I could say it directly to a person rather than an institution, is something like, I saw the other 9 minutes. Not the before or the after. Not the uniform or the gait or the discipline of the stillness. The 9 minutes in between, when the coat was the same, but the person inside was fully present, fully human, and the only one on that pavement who knew what to say. I saw that. I know it probably didn't feel like being seen, but it was. The photograph is still on my phone. I tried again last week. Thumb hover. Put the phone face down. Made tea. Came back and looked at it again. There's a man in a uniform standing at a gate in a city that contains, on any given day, about 9 million people who are all mostly invisible to each other. He is standing very still. The trees behind him are going dark. The light is changing. He will be there until his shift ends. And then he will go wherever he goes and be whoever he is there, with his name and his off-duty shoes and his opinions about football or food or the news, whatever opinions he has, whatever life assembles itself when the bearskin hat comes off. And tomorrow he'll come back and stand there and not be seen. And it occurs to me in the specifically unqualified way that one stranger thinks about another stranger they watch for an hour on a Tuesday. It occurs to me that maybe the discipline is this. He doesn't need to be seen. He has decided that the thing he does is enough, whether or not the applause knows who it's aimed at. And that is either the most admirable thing I can imagine, or the saddest. I'm still working out which.